Hi, my name's Joe Mikowski. I'm a battlefield guide here at the Gettysburg National Park. Fritz and I are over here on CulpsHill, an important landmark on the Gettysburg battlefield. We're going to take a closer look at CulpsHill. First, let me tell you just a little bit about who I am and how the heck I got here. Well, first of all, I'm a historian. I spent most of my career working for the federal government. I retired recently, and in retirement now I'm leading tours here at the National Park. And I've learned that history can be a whole lot of fun, particularly when you go to the places where the history occurred. Reading it out of a book is okay, watching movies is okay, but actually to be on the place where the people once were makes all the difference in the world and can really bring history to life. So we're here where soldiers fought on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1863. The Battle of Gettysburg was the largest battle ever fought in North America. 160,000 soldiers fought out here. When it was over, there were 51,000 casualties, Fritz. That's about 10,000 men who were dead, who were laying out in these fields. That's about 30,000 wounded, men crying for medical attention, and it's about 10,000 men taken prisoner on their way to a prison camp, raising their hands above their head or shackled behind their back. About 51,000 casualties. Gettysburg was a turning point in the 4-year Civil War. And of course, not far from here is where Abraham Lincoln gave the most important speech in American history, the Gettysburg Address, and that speech is still important to us today. So let's first of all talk a little bit about what happens here on CulpsHill. Now, if you look out into the distance, first of all, you can see this wayside marker here. It looks kind of like a fish hook, That would be the position of the Northern Army during the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, the Civil War started in April of 1861 and ended in April of 1865. This in July 1863 in the hot sunshine was in the middle of the war. The war started when 11 southern states broke away from the country. They wanted to have their own country, largely over that slavery issue. There were a lot of other reasons, but the war had been in progress for 2 years before this battle was fought. Most of the battles before this one were fought in Virginia. Since those battles were fought in Virginia, the state of Virginia was devastated and there wasn't any food. So to get food and supplies, the Confederate Army, the Southern Army, led by Robert E. Lee, began an invasion of Pennsylvania in June of 1863 by sweeping west of Washington, D.C. and into the north. Now, the Northern Army was led by General George Gordon Meade. They sort of followed the Confederates into the north and tried to stay between the Confederate Army and Washington, D.C. so that the Confederates could take the capital of Washington, D.C. Well, when Robert E. Lee realized the Northern Army was hot on his heels, he was concerned about his army that was scattered in Pennsylvania being beaten piece by piece. So he looked at a map. He realized that there are roads, 10 roads that come into Gettysburg, and he used those roads to bring his army together. So Robert E. Lee of the Southern Army, the Confederate Army, concentrated his army towards Gettysburg because of the road network that came here. Well, when the General Meade realized the Confederates were concentrating, he called for a concentration of his own army. So it's one of the funny things about the battle is that the Southern Army north, the Northern Army comes from the south, but they slam into each other here in Gettysburg on the morning of July 1st, 1863. Now, on the first day of the battle, on the fields west and north of the town of Gettysburg, 27,000 Confederate soldiers will slam into the Union Army, who's trying to protect the town of Gettysburg and the hills south of town. There'll be hard fighting in these fields. There'll be blood and dead horses everywhere, and the Union Army will be driven back through the town of Gettysburg to CulpsHill. And in the evening of the first day of the battle, up on those hills behind us, there'll be thousands of Union soldiers, their army nearly destroyed, but they'll start to dig in, cut down the trees, and build entrenchments, waiting for the Confederates to attack on the second day. Some of the Union soldiers will be up on CulpsHill. Some will be off to the west over there on Cemetery Hill. So the Union Army will have the high ground on the second day of the battle as the Confederates plan to attack. Now we're over here on this fishhook line. We're over here on the right flank, the right end of the Union line, which is just up ahead of us. The Union line, the men of the Union Army, extend from CulpsHill for 2 miles to the south to a place called Little Round Top. Now the Confederate plan on the second day of the battle is to attack. The Union plan is to defend the high ground, and the fighting will take place right here on CulpsHill on July 2nd, 1863. in the afternoon. Now, on the second day of the battle, the Union soldiers are up on those hills, cutting down trees, building entrenchments, using rocks and logs to build breastworks almost 5 feet high. Now, the Confederates will wait for their orders to attack. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the first Confederate soldiers will begin attacking. First, artillery will start to shell that hill. Incoming artillery will blast away and bombard that position. And then later that afternoon, 5,000 Confederate soldiers will move across these fields and attack Culps Hill. But at the top of the hill, the Union Army will be waiting for them behind breastworks, just waiting for them. And we'll pick up that story later. But one of the soldiers who fights here is a man named Wesley Culp. Now remember, this is Culps Hill. It was named for the Culp family, a German family, C-U-L-P. In fact, this farm was owned by a man named Henry Culp. His nephew was a man named Wesley Culp. Wesley Culp, a young soldier. Now, before the Civil War, Wesley Culp was working here in Gettysburg, making wagons and carriages. But his employer moved south to Virginia. So when his employer moved south, Wesley Culp, in the days before the Civil War, moved down south to Virginia to keep his job. Well, when the Civil War came, Wesley Culp found himself in the South. So he joined a Confederate regiment, the 2nd Virginia Infantry Regiment. Well, that was a famous regiment. They were part of Stonewall Jackson's brigade. Now, on the Battle of Gettysburg, that Virginia brigade moved into Pennsylvania, and they would attack the Union Army up on that hill. And during the battle, young Wesley Culp of the 2nd Virginia Infantry Regiment was killed out here on his uncle's farm. So this boy, brought up in Gettysburg, went south and would die fighting for the Confederacy on the farm of his uncle, Henry Culp, here at Culps Hill.